The Lumar civilization had conquered the stars. Their technology was unparalleled across the known galaxy. Faster-than-light travel, virtually unlimited energy production, artificial intelligence that could predict outcomes across entire planetary systems. Yet for all their advancement, the Lemurians carried with them a primal, collective fear that no amount of technological progress could erase. Thalassophobia, the intense, irrational fear of deep water, wasn't just a psychological condition among the Lemurians. It was an evolutionary response, hardwired into their very DNA. Their home planet, with its vast, predator-filled oceans that once teemed with creatures more nightmarish than any Earth leviathan, had driven their species to the land and eventually to the stars. Their ancestors who ventured into the depths never returned, and those who feared the water survived to pass on their genes and their fear. "Orbital positioning complete, Commander," announced the navigation officer aboard the Abyssal I, a sleek, midnight blue vessel hovering in Earth's upper atmosphere. Perfect thermosphere altitude achieved. All cloaking systems functioning at optimal levels. Commander Xyler acknowledged with a curt nod, his pale blue skin reflecting the soft glow of the ship's control panels. "Execute standard observation protocol. I want comprehensive scans of all major oceanic regions within the next rotation." The Abyssal I was the pride of the Lumar Scientific Corps, a marvel of stealth technology designed specifically for remote observation. Not a single Earth detection system, military or civilian, could perceive its presence. It was the perfect vessel for their most dreaded assignment, studying Earth's oceans. Xyler moved to the central viewing platform, where a three-dimensional holographic representation of Earth's Atlantic Ocean appeared. He couldn't suppress the slight shudder that ran through his slender frame as the projection displayed wave patterns, currents, and depth readings. 71% water coverage, Science Officer Lyra noted, her voice clinically detached as she analyzed the incoming data. "The natives call it the Blue Planet, which seems apt from our observations." Lyra was the anomaly among their crew, a scientist whose curiosity often overshadowed the instinctual fear that plagued their species. While she respected the danger water presented, she also found herself increasingly questioning the rationality of their collective phobia, especially as she collected more data about other aquatic worlds. "Launch the autonomous observation drones," Xyler ordered. "Standard dispersion pattern. Keep them at least 300 meters above the surface." "Deploying now," replied the drone operator, initiating the sequence that released a dozen sleek, teardrop-shaped devices from the ship's underbelly. The drones, each no larger than a human's hand, scattered across the globe, transmitting real-time data back to the Abyssal I. They were equipped with the most advanced sensing technology in the Lumar arsenal: spectral analyzers, biological sample collectors, meteorological instruments, all designed to gather information without ever having to make direct contact with the water surface. On the main observation deck, Xyler and Lyra watched as the view screens filled with images from around the planet. A hurricane churned in the Pacific, its monstrous eye staring up at them like some malevolent entity. Massive currents collided off the coast of South Africa, creating swirling maelstrom that could swallow entire Lumar transport vessels. A blue whale, a creature whose size rivaled some of their smaller scout ships, breached the surface before plunging back into the abyss. "Look at that chaos," Xyler whispered, not bothering to hide the tremor in his voice. "How can anything survive in such conditions? The pressure variations alone would crush our strongest materials." Lyra, however, was focused on a different set of images. "Commander, you should see this," she said, enlarging a feed from the North Atlantic. "The locals, there, on the water." The image showed a collection of vessels, some made of wood, others of metal, moving across the ocean surface. Some were large ships carrying what appeared to be cargo containers, while others were tiny fishing boats with a single operator. "They're not just on the water," Lyra continued, her voice betraying a hint of wonder. "They appear to be harvesting from it, traveling through it, even enjoying it." She highlighted an image of humans on what the database identified as a sailboat, their expressions showing clear signs of pleasure. Xyler stared in disbelief. Illogical. Completely illogical. Check our cultural database. This must be some form of ritual behavior. Perhaps a rite of passage or religious practice. Lyra quickly consulted the information they had gathered on human culture. Negative, Commander. These activities appear to be commonplace across most of their societies. They've been building vessels to traverse their oceans for thousands of years. Madness, Xyler concluded, turning away from the images. Collective madness or extreme biological adaptation we haven't detected. Continue observations and focus on their interaction with these water bodies. Perhaps there's something we're missing, some form of protection or immunity they possess. As the abyssal eye continued its silent vigil, neither Xyler nor Lyra could have anticipated that their most valuable insights wouldn't come from their advanced technology or comprehensive databases, but from a single human whose relationship with the ocean would challenge everything they thought they knew. The morning sun broke over the eastern horizon, casting long golden rays across the small fishing village nestled in the remote Azorian coastline. Mateo Oliveira rose before the light touched his window, as he had done every day for the past 50 years. Age had bent his back slightly and carved deep lines into his weathered face, but his movements remained precise and purposeful as he prepared for the day ahead. His small stone cottage sat slightly apart from the rest of the village, perched on a rocky outcrop that gave him an unobstructed view of the Atlantic. The isolation suited him. After losing his wife a decade ago, Mateo had retreated further into the rhythms of the sea, finding in its constants and changes a companion that asked nothing but respect and offered boundless sustenance in return. The villagers regarded him with a mixture of reverence and cautious distance. They purchased his catch when he brought it to market, sought his advice when the weather turned unpredictable, but rarely ventured to his door for social calls. Mateo was a man of the sea more than a man of the land, and they understood his solitude was not rejection, but simply his nature. Dieu, he whispered to the ocean as he made his way down the narrow path to the small dock where Esperanca waited. The name, meaning hope, in Portuguese, had been painted on the bow by his wife 30 years ago, and though the letters had faded, Mateo carefully refreshed them each spring with the same blue paint. Esperanca was not impressive by modern standards. A 20-foot wooden boat with a small cabin and a modest engine that Mateo used only when necessary. He preferred the silence of sails and the simple wooden tiller beneath his hand. The boat's hull showed patches and repairs from decades of service, but like its captain, it remained sturdy and reliable. Mateo loaded his supplies methodically. Nets mended the previous evening, bait collected from tidal pools at dawn, thermoses of strong coffee, and bread baked by old Maria from the village who still insisted on providing for him despite his protests that he needed nothing from anyone. Before casting off, Mateo studied the sky and water with practiced eyes. Low-pressure system moving in from the west. Not immediately threatening, but worth monitoring. The seabirds were flying in tight formations close to shore. Small fish would be schooling near the surface today. The water's color had that particular deep blue-green that often preceded the arrival of tuna this time of year. With practiced movements, Mateo untied the mooring lines and pushed away from the dock. The early morning breeze filled his patched sail, and Esperanca responded eagerly, cutting through the slight chop as they headed toward Mateo's preferred fishing grounds, known only to him after decades of careful observation. 3 hours later, Mateo found himself 20 miles offshore, in a location he had marked not on any chart but in his memory. Here, an underwater ridge created upwellings that attracted the larger fish he sought. His nets were already half filled with a respectable catch when he noticed the first signs of the approaching storm. The change was subtle, a shift in the water's texture, a distant darkening of the horizon that less experienced eyes might miss. Mateo frowned. The storm wasn't supposed to arrive until evening, according to both his own reading of the morning signs and the weather report he'd heard on his small radio. This was developing faster, building strength more quickly than anticipated. Most fishermen would immediately turn for shore, the sensible choice when faced with uncertain weather. But Mateo hesitated. The storm was still distant enough, and the signs suggested it might track slightly north of his position. If he remained, he could finish filling his nets before the worst arrived. It was a calculated risk, one that only someone intimately familiar with the ocean's patterns could even consider. Mateo made his decision, adjusting his position slightly to the southeast and continuing to work his nets with efficient precision. By midday, the storm had indeed accelerated, but so had Mateo's catch. His nets were now full with premium fish that would fetch excellent prices and feed many in the village. As he began to secure his catch and prepare for the return journey, the first strong gusts hit Esperanca's sail. The small boat heeled sharply, and Mateo quickly adjusted, reducing sail and turning the bow to better ride the increasingly heavy swells. The sky had darkened dramatically, the wind now howling through his rigging. What had promised to be a manageable challenge was rapidly becoming a serious situation. Lesser mariners might have panicked, but Mateo's expression remained calm, his hands steady on the tiller. This was not his first storm, nor likely his last. The ocean's fury was not personal. It was simply the sea being the sea. Understanding this truth was what separated those who feared the water from those who could work with it. The rain came in horizontal sheets, stinging Mateo's face and hands. Waves now crashed over Esperanca's bow, sending spray across the deck. The boat groaned under the assault but held together, a testament to the quality of its construction and Mateo's meticulous maintenance. "Come then," Mateo muttered into the wind, not in challenge but acknowledgement. "Let's dance again, old friend." He knew of a small cove about 5 miles southward, sheltered by a jutting peninsula that could provide refuge until the worst passed. The route there would require navigating treacherous cross seas, but attempting to return to his village harbor in these conditions would risk being dashed against the protective seawall. For 2 hours, Mateo fought the elements, his entire being focused on the dialogue between his hands, the tiller, and the ocean's movements. Sometimes yielding, sometimes pushing back, finding the rhythm within the chaos. Esperanca pitched and rolled violently, but Mateo anticipated each motion, making minute adjustments that kept them afloat and moving, however slowly, towards safety. When the small, protected bay finally came into view, Mateo allowed himself a brief smile of satisfaction. The entrance was narrow and flanked by partially submerged rocks, a death trap for the unfamiliar, but a haven for someone who knew exactly where the safe passage lay. With precise maneuvering, he guided Esperanca through the opening and into the relatively calm waters beyond. As the roar of the open ocean faded behind the natural breakwater, Mateo set his anchor and finally allowed his tense muscles to relax. The storm would pass, as all storms did. His catch was secure, his boat intact, and he had once again negotiated terms with the sea. Not victory. Mateo never thought of his relationship with the ocean in terms of winning or losing. It was cooperation, mutual respect, and the deep understanding that comes from a lifetime of observation. As he poured himself a cup of coffee from his thermos, Mateo had no way of knowing that his actions had been observed by beings from beyond the stars, or that his simple expertise would soon challenge the foundations of an advanced civilization's deepest fears. "Orbital stabilization is deteriorating," cried the navigation officer, her fingers dancing across the control panel as warning signals flashed throughout the Abyssal Eyes command center. Commander Zyler gripped the edge of the central console, his expression tight with concern. "Source of the disturbance?" "Unknown, Commander," Science Officer Lyra replied, analyzing the incoming data streams. "The solar radiation levels have spiked unexpectedly. Our shielding should have been adequate, but something in the emission pattern is interfering with our propulsion systems," and she stopped abruptly, staring at her readings. "The cloaking field is fluctuating. We're becoming visible to Earth detection systems." The news sent a ripple of panic through the bridge crew. The Lumar Scientific Corps' prime directive was absolute. No direct contact with developing worlds. Observation only, invisible and undetectable. "Emergency protocols," Zyler ordered, his voice steady despite the crisis. Redirect all non-essential power to the cloaking systems. Insufficient, Commander, Lyra reported grimly. The radiation is creating a cascading failure in our energy distribution network. We need to find shelter and make repairs. Shelter? On an ocean world? Xyler couldn't keep the horror from his voice. Lyra projected a topographical map of the area directly below them. There's a section of coastline with significant rocky formations that could mask our energy signature from most Earth detection systems. If we position ourselves correctly, we might appear as nothing more than an anomalous weather reading. Xyler hesitated. The proposed location would place them perilously close to the water's surface, closer than any Lumar vessel had ever voluntarily positioned itself on a hydrographic world. We have no choice, Commander, Lyra pressed. Without repairs, we risk complete exposure. After a moment of internal struggle, Xyler nodded sharply. Execute emergency. Descent. Minimal engine usage to avoid detection. And may the cosmic architects protect us. The abyssal eye began its controlled descent toward Earth's surface, its normally silent propulsion system emitting occasional bursts of energy that manifested as strange, shimmering distortions in the air. The ship, designed for the vacuum of space and high atmospheric operation, struggled against the increasing density of the lower atmosphere, its hull vibrating with the strain. As they approached the coordinates Lyra had identified, the navigation officer suddenly tensed. Commander, we have a complication. There's a native vessel in the vicinity of our designated shelter point. The main screen shifted to show a small wooden boat anchored in a protected cove, precisely where they needed to position themselves for repairs. Identification, Xyler demanded. Appears to be a solitary fishing vessel, Lyra answered, enhancing the image. Single occupant. Primitive technology. He seems to have taken shelter from the same storm system that's affecting the regional area. Xyler paced the command deck, his mind racing through limited options. Can we relocate? Negative, Commander. This is the only suitable location within our current operational range. Any farther, and we risk complete cloaking failure over populated areas. Then we proceed as planned, Xyler decided after a moment's consideration. Maintain whatever cloaking capacity we have. The native will likely dismiss any glimpse of us as weather phenomena or ocean reflection. The abyssal eye continued its descent, maneuvering carefully into the sheltered cove, maintaining as much distance as possible from the small fishing boat, while still utilizing the rocky outcroppings for additional concealment. As they stabilized just above the water's surface, Xyler ordered all non-essential systems shut down to conserve power and minimize detectability. Through the viewports, the crew could see the churning ocean mere meters below their hull, its surface whipped into white-capped fury by the storm. Almost every Lumar on board felt the instinctual fear rising in their throats. Being this close to such a vast body of water violated everything their evolutionary history had taught them to avoid. Begin repairs immediately, Xyler instructed the engineering team, trying to ignore the proximity of the water. I want us operational and back in the upper atmosphere as soon as possible. Commander, Lyra called, her voice unusually tense. The human. He's seen us. On the small boat, Mateo Oliveira stood at the stern, his weathered hand shading his eyes as he gazed directly at the partially visible Lumar vessel. His expression showed neither panic nor fear, only intense curiosity and something that looked remarkably like concern. He's changing course, Lyra reported incredulously. He's approaching us. Mateo had weathered many storms in his life, but he had never seen anything like the strange object now hovering near the far side of the cove. At first, he had thought it a peculiar cloud formation or perhaps a reflection of the sun breaking through the storm clouds. But as he studied it more carefully, he realized it was solid, a metallic structure of some kind, certainly not a natural phenomenon. His first thought was that it might be an experimental aircraft or perhaps a military device that had been damaged in the storm. Whatever it was, it seemed to be in distress, occasionally emitting strange pulses of light and hovering unsteadily just above the water's surface. Mateo considered his options. The storm was still raging outside the protected cove, making any attempt to return to the village dangerous. The strange object wasn't threatening him in any obvious way. And if it contained people in trouble, well, the law of the sea was clear on such matters. Assistance was not optional, it was duty. With deliberate movements, he started Esperanca's small engine and carefully navigated toward the mysterious object, maintaining a respectful distance while trying to get a better look. As he drew closer, the object's appearance seemed to shift and waver, sometimes appearing almost transparent before becoming solid again. Nothing in Mateo's extensive experience could explain what he was seeing. "Hello," he called out, his voice carrying across the water despite the wind. "Do you need help?" Inside the abyssal eye, panic threatened to overtake the bridge crew. "Active defense systems," Zyler ordered, instinctively reaching for security protocols. "Systems non-responsive," the security officer reported. "The energy fluctuations have compromised our defensive capabilities." "He's attempting communication," Lyra noted, observing Mateo through their external sensors. "Can our translators decipher his language?" Zyler asked, studying the human with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Basic translation is functional," Lyra confirmed after consulting her console. "He's asking if we require assistance." She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Assistance? From a primitive being in a wooden vessel. Zyler's tone was incredulous. Lyra's analytical mind was already processing this unexpected development. "Commander, this behavior contradicts our understanding of primitive species' typical responses to unknown technology. Fear, aggression, or flight would be the anticipated reactions, not offers of help." "Perhaps it's a trap," suggested the security officer. "A way to get closer and examine our technology." Lyra shook her head, still watching Mateo through the sensors. "His vital signs don't indicate deception or aggression. Heart rate elevated, but within normal parameters for his species, respiration steady, body language open rather than defensive." She paused. "I believe his offer is genuine." "Irrelevant," Zyler said firmly. "We maintain isolation protocols." No response. But as he spoke, the ship shuddered violently, and another cascade of warning lights flooded the control panels. "Energy core destabilizing," reported the engineering officer. "The solar radiation has affected our containment field. If it fails completely, the resulting discharge could be catastrophic, both for us and potentially for the surrounding area." Zyler's face paled. A containment breach wouldn't just expose them to the native population. It could harm or kill the human who, against all reasonable expectations, had offered them help rather than hostility. "Options?" he asked tightly. "We need to vent excess energy through the auxiliary systems," the engineer explained. "But our standard procedure requires a stable platform. With the water conditions and our current positioning, we're too unstable," Lyra finished for him. "We need to secure the ship." She hesitated before adding, "The human's vessel appears to have anchoring equipment. He might be able to help stabilize us." Zyler stared at her in disbelief. "You're suggesting we accept assistance from a primitive being?" "I'm suggesting we consider all available resources to prevent a catastrophe," Lyra countered. "Our sensors indicate this human has extensive knowledge of local conditions. His actions during the storm demonstrated exceptional environmental adaptation skills." As they argued, the ship shuddered again, more violently this time, and briefly dipped toward the water surface before the emergency systems compensated. "Commander, we're running out of time," the engineer warned. Zyler closed his eyes briefly, wrestling with the decision that violated everything his training and instincts told him was correct. Finally, he nodded. "Establish minimal communication. Visual representations only. No direct language exchange. Make it clear we need anchoring assistance." Lyra worked quickly at her console, programming a simple holographic projection that could be displayed externally. "Ready, Commander." Zyler took a deep breath. "Proceed." Outside, Mateo watched in astonishment as a beam of light projected from the strange vessel, creating a three-dimensional image that hovered in the air between them. The image showed the vessel connected to the rocky seabed by lines similar to anchor chains, then demonstrated energy flowing out of the craft in a controlled manner. Matteo might not understand the technology, but he immediately grasped the problem. Whatever this thing was, it needed to be secured to prevent it from being damaged further by the motion of the water. That, at least, was something he understood perfectly. He nodded decisively and pointed to his own anchor and ropes, then to the rocky outcroppings that provided good holding ground in the cove, making a securing motion with his hands. Then he pointed to himself and made a circular motion around the vessel, indicating he would help secure it from all sides. Inside the abyssal eye, Lyra watched in fascination. He understands, Commander. Without words, without common technology, he comprehended our need. Proceed with caution, Xyler ordered, still uncomfortable with the situation, but seeing no alternative. Over the next hour, Matteo worked methodically, using Esperanca to circle the alien craft, helping to secure it to the rocky formations around the cove with his spare anchor and ropes. The Lumar vessel extended small magnetic attachment points where needed, working in an unusual but effective partnership with the elderly fisherman. As Matteo worked, he occasionally glanced up at the strange craft, his eyes filled with wonder but his hands remaining steady and sure. Whatever this thing was, whoever was inside it, they needed help, and the sea had taught him that in times of crisis, backgrounds and differences meant nothing compared to the immediate needs of survival. With the vessel finally secured against the water's motion, Matteo backed Esperanca to a respectful distance and watched as soft, pulsating lights began to emanate from various points on the craft's hull. Despite having no understanding of the technology, he somehow sensed it was going through some kind of healing process, and he settled in to keep watch, just as he would for any vessel in distress. Inside the abyssal eye, the engineering team worked frantically to redirect and vent the excess energy, a process made infinitely easier by the stability the human had provided. Energy levels stabilizing. The chief engineer reported with relief. Containment field integrity improving. We should be able to complete repairs within 3 standard units. On the command deck, Lyra continued to observe Matteo through the external sensors. Commander, I request permission to record comprehensive data on the human's methods. The way he read the environment, selected anchor points, utilized the natural features of this cove, it demonstrates an intimate understanding of fluid dynamics that our theoretical models haven't fully captured. Xyler, somewhat recovered from the immediate crisis, found his scientific curiosity awakening. Permission granted, but maintain observation protocols. No direct interaction. Lyra began meticulously documenting everything about Matteo's actions. The way he tested the rock formations before securing lines to them, how he positioned his own vessel to account for the changing tide, the calm efficiency with which he worked despite the extraordinary circumstances. Compare his techniques to our hydrological behavior models, she instructed her assistant. The results were surprising. The Lumar had developed extensive theoretical models of how to manage water-based environments, but they were largely constructed from remote observation and physics calculations. Matteo's practical knowledge, gained through decades of direct experience, showed solutions and approaches their models hadn't predicted. It's remarkable, Lyra murmured, reviewing the comparison data. Our technology is thousands of years more advanced, yet his understanding of this environment exceeds our most sophisticated models. He's not fighting against the water. He's working with it, anticipating its movements, using its forces rather than opposing them. Xyler found himself drawn to the observation screens, studying the elderly human with growing interest. How does he navigate without sensors, without predictive algorithms? I believe he's developed his own organic algorithms, Lyra suggested. Decades of observation and experience encoded into intuitive knowledge. He's reading subtle cues in wave patterns, wind direction, cloud formations, creating a comprehensive environmental model using only his biological senses. As they watched, Matteo suddenly became alert, looking toward the mouth of the cove with concern. He quickly moved to secure additional lines to his own boat, and checked the moorings he'd helped establish for the Lumar vessel. "What's happening?" Zyler asked. Lyra consulted the sensors. "I'm not detecting any significant change in weight." She adjusted the settings. "There's a subtle pressure shift occurring, and the underwater currents are changing direction. Our standard sensors weren't configured to detect it, but he somehow perceived it." Within minutes, her readings confirmed what Mateo had already known. The storm pattern was shifting, and a surge of water was about to funnel through the cove's entrance, creating a temporary but potentially dangerous increase in water turbulence. "Alert the engineering team," Zyler ordered. "Reinforce structural integrity fields." But before the Lumar could complete their preparations, the surge hit. A rush of water that would have sent their vessel crashing against the rocks had it not been for Mateo's foresight in securing additional moorings precisely where they were needed most. As the water calmed again, Zyler stared at the human boat, where Mateo sat calmly, checking his lines, having anticipated and prepared for a threat the Lumar's advanced technology had failed to detect in time. "Our entire understanding of primitive species needs revision," Lyra said quietly. "We've been defining advancement solely through technological achievement, but this human demonstrates a form of intelligence our assessments have failed to properly value." Zyler didn't respond immediately, his worldview undergoing a subtle but profound shift. The Lumar had always considered themselves superior to water-dwelling species, their fear of oceans balanced by pride in having evolved beyond the need to interact with such chaotic environments. But watching Mateo's casual mastery of conditions that terrified his own crew, Zyler began to question what truly constituted advancement. "We fear what he embraces," he finally said. "Our technology allows us to avoid confronting that fear, while he has learned to thrive within it through understanding rather than avoidance." As the repairs continued, both the commander and his science officer found themselves watching the human with growing respect. Not as a curiosity or primitive being, but as a master of a domain they had never had the courage to truly comprehend. The repair cycle completed as the storm outside the protected cove began to abate. The abyssal eyes systems had been stabilized, its energy core rebalanced, and its cloaking capabilities restored to operational status. By all measures, the crisis had passed, but Commander Zyler found himself reluctant to give the order to depart. "Final systems check complete," reported the engineering officer. "We're ready to disengage moorings and return to orbital observation position." Zyler nodded, then turned to Lyra. "And our assistant?" "The human has remained at a respectful distance throughout our repair cycle," she replied. "He appears to be preparing his own vessel to depart as the weather clears, but he continues to monitor our status periodically." The commander faced a decision that no protocol had prepared him for. Standard procedure was absolutely clear. Any native who had direct contact with Lumar technology must undergo memory modification before departure. The psychic erasure was designed to be gentle but thorough, removing all recollection of the encounter while leaving the rest of the subject's memories intact. But as Zyler considered giving the order, he found himself unusually hesitant. "Is the memory modification system operational?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, Commander," confirmed the medical officer. "But—" he paused, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Continue," Zyler prompted. "Given the circumstances, I feel compelled to note that this human's actions likely saved our vessel and crew. The ethical implications of altering his memory without consent are troubling." Zyler was surprised by the medical officer's commentary, but found it mirrored his own unexpected reluctance. He turned to Lyra. "Your assessment?" Lyra had been preparing for this question. "Commander, I would like to present a scientific argument for an exception to standard protocol in this case." She activated her data display. "This human represents a unique research subject, one who has demonstrated exceptional adaptation to an environment our species struggles to understand. His knowledge appears to be experiential rather than technological, which makes it particularly valuable for our ongoing research into water worlds." She continued, warming to her argument. "If we modify his memory, we lose the opportunity to observe how this encounter might influence his future interactions with the environment. Will he look at the sky differently? Will he develop new theories about what exists beyond his world? These questions have significant scientific value. Zyler considered her words carefully. You're suggesting we leave his memory intact as an experiment? I'm suggesting that in this specific case, the scientific value of non-intervention may outweigh the security concerns of our standard protocol, Lyra clarified. Additionally, if we examine population data for his region, we find that claims of encounters with unidentified phenomena are generally dismissed by the broader society. Any account he shares is statistically unlikely to be widely believed or to impact the development trajectory of his species. Zyler moved to the viewport, watching as Mateo checked his fishing nets, seemingly untroubled by the extraordinary encounter he was experiencing. There was something about the human's quiet dignity, his matter-of-fact approach to the inexplicable, that commanded respect. Very well, Zyler decided. We will implement a compromise, a partial modification, enough to obscure specific technical details but preserving the general experience. He will recall an encounter, but without clarity on the nature of our vessel or its origins. This was unprecedented, but Zyler felt the situation warranted exceptional measures. The Lumar owed this human a debt, and complete erasure of the experience seemed a poor repayment for his assistance. Prepare for departure, he ordered, and prepare a suitable acknowledgement for the human. Lyra looked up in surprise. Commander, nothing technological, Zyler clarified. Something appropriate to his lifestyle that won't disrupt his culture's development. As the crew prepared for departure, Lyra worked with the ship's fabrication system to create a token of appreciation that would be meaningful to Mateo without violating non-interference protocols. Outside, Mateo watched as the strange vessel began to show signs of activity. Throughout the repair process, he had maintained his distance, understanding instinctively that whoever, or whatever, was inside needed space to work. The storm had cleared, leaving the late afternoon sun to cast golden light across the now calm waters of the cove. He was preparing to weigh anchor when a small object emerged from the vessel and floated gently toward his boat. Curious but unafraid, Mateo reached out and caught it. As it descended, a small, perfectly formed replica of a fish species he had never seen before, carved from a material that resembled mother-of-pearl but seemed to subtly change colors as the light hit it. As he examined the beautiful object, the alien craft began to rise silently from the water's surface. Its outline shimmered and wavered until it became almost transparent against the sky. Mateo watched, transfixed, as it ascended rapidly and then vanished completely into the deepening blue above. For a long moment, he stood motionless on the deck of Esperanza, the strange artifact cool against his palm, his weathered face turned toward the empty sky. Then, with a slight smile, he carefully tucked the object into his shirt pocket, started his engine, and set course for home. When Mateo returned to his village that evening, his substantial catch was met with approval and relief by the local market. If anyone noticed his thoughtful, distant expression, they attributed it to the storm he had weathered. No one asked about the small, iridescent object he occasionally took from his pocket to study when he thought no one was watching, and Mateo offered no explanations. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. He continued his daily journeys onto the ocean, fishing with the same skill and intuition he had always possessed. But sometimes, especially on clear nights, villagers noticed him sitting outside his cottage, looking up at the stars with an expression that seemed to hold both question and understanding. The partially modified memory left him with impressions rather than details, a sense of having encountered something extraordinary, of having offered help and having that help accepted, of a brief connection across an unimaginable divide. It was enough to bring wonder, but not enough to disrupt the foundations of his world. Aboard the Abyssal Eye, now restored to its proper observation position in Earth's thermosphere, Commander Zyler faced a different challenge, preparing the mission report for Lumar High Command. No Lumar vessel had ever engaged directly with natives on a water world, and no commander had ever deviated from memory modification protocols. The potential repercussions were significant. Lyra had been working tirelessly, compiling a comprehensive scientific analysis to support their actions. I've completed the comparative study between our theoretical hydrological models and the human's practical methodologies, she informed Xyler, presenting her findings. The discrepancies are remarkable and offer valuable insights for future research. Xyler reviewed her work with growing appreciation. You've made a compelling case, Lyra. This encounter has provided data that decades of remote observation could never have yielded. Xyler began preparing his report, carefully detailing the unexpected solar radiation event, the emergency procedures, and the remarkable interaction with the human fisherman. He made no attempt to downplay their deviation from standard protocols, instead emphasizing the exceptional nature of the circumstances and the scientific value of their decision. Do you believe High Command will understand our actions? Lyra asked, watching him finalize the transmission. I don't know, Xyler admitted. But I do know that what we witnessed challenges the foundations of our approach to water worlds. If we cannot acknowledge that we are not the scientific civilization we claim to be. The report was transmitted, traveling across space to the Lumar homeworld. For several cycles, the Abyssal I continued its observation mission, with Xyler and Lyra occasionally directing sensors toward the small Portuguese village where Mateo had returned to his daily routines. When the response finally came from High Command, it was not what either of them had expected. Instead of censure or reassignment, they received new directives: expand the study to include more detailed observation of how human societies interact with oceanic environments, with particular focus on traditional knowledge systems like those demonstrated by the fishermen. It appears your report has stirred considerable interest, Commander, noted the communications officer, reviewing the extensive list of new research parameters. Not just interest, Lyra observed, scanning the document's authorization codes. This comes directly from the Science Council. They've created an entirely new research initiative based on our encounter. The final section of the transmission contains something unprecedented: the formation of a special task force dedicated to examining the Lumar cultural aversion to water, investigating whether their species' evolutionary fear had become an unnecessary limitation to their understanding of the universe. They're questioning thousands of years of cultural conditioning, Xyler said quietly, because of one human fisherman. On the Lumar homeworld, the report from the Abyssal I had indeed created ripples that quickly grew into waves. The scientific community had received the detailed observations of Mateo with fascination, leading to passionate debates about the nature of intelligence, adaptation, and the relationship between technology and environment. Professor Nairn, the foremost xenobiologist on the Science Council, presented the case to a packed auditorium at the Central Academy. What Commander Xyler and Science Officer Lyra documented challenges our fundamental assumption that technological advancement represents the only meaningful measure of species capability, she argued. This human's intuitive mastery of a hostile environment, achieved through observation and experience rather than technological mediation, suggests alternative evolutionary paths to environmental mastery that we have systematically overlooked. Not everyone was convinced. Many Lemurians, particularly those in the security divisions, expressed alarm at the protocol violations and the potential risks of leaving even modified memories intact in a native species. This sentimentality endangers our entire observation program, insisted Security Director Vash during council deliberations. The next time our personnel face crisis conditions on an observation mission, will they feel entitled to make similar exceptions? Where does this end? But the scientific argument proved compelling to enough council members that a compromise was reached. The Abyssal I would continue its mission, but with supplemental directives to expand their research focus. And most controversially, a small but groundbreaking initiative was approved, a program to help interested Lemurians gradually confront and potentially overcome their species' instinctive hydrophobia. 6 cycles later, in a specially designed facility at the Science Academy, a group of young Lemurian scientists stood nervously at the edge of a small pool of water, the first such training environment ever constructed on their homeworld. The water was shallow, completely transparent, and surrounded by every possible safety measure. Yet the participants visibly trembled at the prospect of making contact with it. "Remember," instructed the program leader, "we begin with simple observation and proximity. No one is expected to make physical contact today. Just stand at the edge and observe your reactions. Remember the breathing techniques." Among the participants was Mira, Lyra's younger sister, who had been profoundly affected by the reports from Earth. As she stood looking down at the small pool, she recalled the imagery of the elderly human fisherman, calmly navigating massive waves that would trigger panic attacks in most Lemurians merely by viewing recordings. He wasn't born without fear, she thought to herself. He learned to work with it, through it. Taking a deep breath, Mira did something none of the other participants had yet dared. She knelt down and, after a moment's hesitation, dipped her fingertips into the water. The sensation was shocking, cold, wet, encompassing, and her first instinct was to recoil. But she held steady, allowing herself to experience the unfamiliar feeling, observing her own reactions with scientific detachment even as her heart raced. When she finally withdrew her hand, the others stared at her with a mixture of horror and admiration. "It's just water," she said softly, looking at her damp fingers. "Just another element in our universe. Not a monster. Not our enemy." News of this small but significant action spread quickly through scientific circles, becoming something of a symbolic moment. If one Lemurian could touch water voluntarily, perhaps their species' relationship with hydrous environments wasn't as immutably fixed as they had believed. Far away on Earth, entirely unaware of his role in this cultural shift, Mateo Oliveira continued his solitary life by the sea. One evening, as he returned from a successful day of fishing, he paused at the end of the dock, looking out over the Atlantic as the setting sun turned the water into a canvas of orange and gold. The strange encounter in the cove during the storm remained with him, not as clear memories, but as impressions that occasionally surfaced like fish from deep water. Sometimes he wondered if age was finally catching up with him, creating fanciful recollections where only ordinary experiences had occurred. But then his fingers would touch the small iridescent token he kept in his pocket, and he would smile, knowing that some mysteries were better left unexplained. As night fell, he looked up at the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. How strange to think that the same ocean that had defined his entire existence could be an object of fear to someone else. The sea could be dangerous, yes, deserving of respect and caution, but it was also a provider, a teacher, even a friend to those who took the time to understand its ways. "We're not so different after all," he murmured to the distant stars, though he couldn't have articulated exactly what he meant by this. Then, with the contentment of a man at peace with his place in the world, he turned and walked home, leaving footprints in the sand that the morning tide would erase. The relationship between the vast oceans and the beings who encountered them, whether human fishermen with weathered hands or advanced aliens with starships, was ultimately the same. A negotiation between fear and understanding, between the desire for control and the wisdom to know when to yield. The difference lay not in technology or evolution, but in the willingness to engage rather than avoid, to learn rather than assume, to respect rather than fear. On the Abyssal Eye, now equipped with expanded research parameters and a crew increasingly interested in oceanic environments, Commander Zyler stood at the observation deck, watching Earth's vast ocean spread below them. He no longer felt the instinctive dread that had once accompanied such views. Instead, he experienced something new, a curious blend of respect and wonder. "Commander," Lyra approached with a data tablet. "The new atmospheric sensors have detected an incoming storm system in the Atlantic. Category 3, possibly strengthening to 4 before landfall." Zyler nodded. "Direct observation drones to safe monitoring positions." And he paused, making a decision. "Let's track the fishing patterns in the affected regions. I'm particularly interested in the small vessel responses to approaching weather systems. Any specific vessels we should prioritize?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. Zyler allowed himself a small smile. There's a particular wooden boat named Esperanza. Let's see what its captain teaches us today. As the abyssal eye continued its silent vigil, the lessons from a single encounter expanded outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, touching first a ship, then a civilization, challenging assumptions, and offering new perspectives that would influence Lumar's science and culture for generations to come. And far below, unaware of his role as teacher, Mateo prepared for another day on the water. His relationship with the ocean a living testament to the power of understanding over fear, of experience over theory, of respect over avoidance. His legacy would outlive him, not just in the stories that might someday be told in his village about strange lights seen during a storm, but in the gradual transformation of a spacefaring civilization's relationship with the universe's most fundamental element. They had thought Earth's oceans were unconquerable until they met a fisherman, and in that meeting discovered that conquest had never been the point at all.